The rarest fish in the world exists in a place you'd least expect it. Can you take a guess? If you didn't click on this video by mistake, I really hope you guessed Death Valley. In the middle of the Nevadan desert exists a scientific wonder known as Devil's Hole, a water-filled geothermal cave system. The depth of this cave is unknown since cave divers have only made it to about 500 feet below the surface. A really cool thing about this cave is that earthquakes thousands of miles away can trigger what some geologists call desert tsunamis, or seishes, where waves and rapid water level fluctuations occur in Devil's Hole. Now before you start planning a scuba trip, Devil's Hole is off limits to the public unless you have special permits which are reserved mainly for research activities. And this is to protect the rarest fish in the world, known as the Devil's Hole pupfish, which only exists in this one geothermal cavern. As of spring 2024, there were about 200 pupfish living in these waters. Now you might be asking, how did these fish get here? How long have they been here? And how inbred are they? To answer the last question, very inbred. Actually one of, if not the most inbred animal in the world. Any given pupfish shares over 50% of its DNA with another, but they're still cute. To answer the other questions, we'll have to go back. Way back. Last time we learned about the unique geological wonder known as a mar, and luckily made it out of the Ubehebe crater.
I'll go speed running it. I'm down here looking at rocks. Or maybe rocks are my excuse to take a break because my heart is like, whoo! This is no freaking joke.
As mentioned in my last video, this was not the first time Death Valley experienced large explosions. This area has a long history of volcanism and active plate movement, giving rise to a complicated geological puzzle of faulting and folding. Today we will dive into this history and learn how it's related to the vibrant colors of artist palette, the sinking Badwater Basin, and of course, the Devil's Hole pupfish. Death Valley's oldest rocks, formed at least 1.7 billion years ago, are so severely altered by crustal movement and erosion that their history is almost undecipherable. The majority of the legible geological record that covers the Death Valley region occurred post 500 million years ago. 500 million years ago, the Funeral and Panamint Mountains that tower over Death Valley today did not exist. Limestones and sandstones found in these mountains indicate that they and Death Valley was the site of a warm, shallow sea throughout most of the Paleozoic era. This era would have included the Cambrian explosion, which was a biodiversification event that resulted in a huge diversity of animal species, many with complex body structures including hard shells, exoskeletons, and the first signs of advanced nervous and sensory systems unlike anything seen before this time. Toward the end of the Paleozoic, around 250 million years ago, just before Pangaea began splitting up, tectonic plates began to move, bringing an end to this warm, shallow sea and all the life in it. During this time, Death Valley rested near the boundary between two tectonic plates, the Farallon and the North American plates. An oceanic plate, known as the Farallon Plate, started a collision course for the North American plate. Oceanic crust is denser than continental crust, so when the two met, the Farallon Plate subducted. As the plates slowly moved in relation to each other, compressional forces gradually folded, warped, and fractured the brittle crust. These forces also caused widespread uplift where the shallow sea slowly became a terrestrial landmass. This widespread rock deformation and faulting occurred through most of the Mesozoic era, also known as the Age of the Dinosaurs, causing many fractures and faults in the crust. An important thing to know is that as the Farallon plate subducted into the mantle, it melted. This melted material, known as magma, then rose through the mantle. All of the fractures and faults in the crust created by compressional forces allowed magma from the mantle to rise and form chains of volcanoes as the Farallon plate continued to move. This is the event that formed the modern-day Sierra Nevadas and many of the volcanoes in Death Valley. Volcanoes first appeared to the northeast in Nevada and blanketed the Death Valley region with numerous layers of ash and cinders. The topography at this time consisted of gently rolling hills where one could spot large rhino-like mammals and an early horse grazing. Over time, the center of volcanic activity moved progressively westward, producing a chain of volcanoes from Furnace Creek to Shoshone. This volcanic period occurred between 65 to 2 million years ago, long after the Farallon plate fully disappeared under the North American plate 20 million years ago.
I am at a place where you can see the evidence of all of this volcanic activity. Right now, I am in Artist Palette, and millions of years ago, it looked a lot different. There were volcanoes scattered across the landscape, spewing cinders and ash. And then after millions of years, all of that material was buried. And then millions and millions of years later, as those volcanoes became dormant and extinct, this was all buried, and then erosion started to happen, exposing a lot of the minerals within the soil to the atmosphere. And as the atmosphere interacted with minerals in the soil, in the sediment, then the colors that we see here started to pop out. So the reds and the browns that we see, that's chemical weathering of iron-rich hematite and iron oxides. The purples that we see, that indicates that there's manganese in the rock. And the green, that's mica-rich volcanic ash. Green chlorite, that chemical weathering and erosion, as you can clearly see, continues today. So many years from now, we might see even more color all across the landscape.
As mentioned, by about 20 million years ago, the Farallon plate had been consumed, and the Pacific plate and the North American plate formed a strike-slip plate boundary, which we know today as the San Andreas Fault. What had once been a compressional stress zone became a shear zone with right lateral movement. All those big fancy words just means that it went from two plates squishing into each other to then moving past one another. Then, 3 million years ago, the dynamics of crustal movement changed again, and Death Valley as we know it today began to form. Tectonic plates began pulling apart, allowing large blocks of land to slowly slide past one another along normal faults, forming alternating valleys and mountain ranges. About 1 million years later, there was another big change that occurred. Around 2 million years ago, the climate began to go through a cooling period known as the Pleistocene glaciation period. Evidence of this glaciation period can be seen at Mosaic Canyon. During this time, Death Valley was filled by a large lake known as Lake Manly. At its largest, it was up to 600 feet deep and many miles long. Many other lakes existed in the surrounding valleys and were interconnected by streams and channels. Devil's Hole was part of that system. The ancestors of the now much smaller population of pupfish inhabited this vast system of lakes and streams of the Pleistocene. Then, as the climate began to warm 10,000 years ago, the lakes started to dry up, leaving the pupfish stranded in small water bodies and then eventually sequestered in the one water body that did not dry up, Devil's Hole. This is because Devil's Hole is connected to an underground aquifer beneath Nevada and California. So as long as the aquifer continues to supply water to Devil's Hole, the pupfish are safe, relatively. There have been circumstances where unauthorized people have taken a dip in these forbidden waters, inadvertently killing pupfish. It's amazing that these hardy little creatures are still surviving after thousands of years of isolation, and it's an enigma how much longer they will live on. Will the pool one day dry up, or will water flood the valley once again? It's hard to say, but one thing that is certain in Death Valley is change. The drying lakes left more than just the pupfish behind. They also left something that would become valuable to humans. Rainwater carried rocks, gravel, sand, and silt down from surrounding hills and mountains and deposited them into the lakes. Some of this transported material included an important economic mineral known as borax, likely sourced from deposits in the Funeral Mountains. As the lakes evaporated, vast fields of sodium chloride, gypsum, calcite, and borax appeared. You may be surprised to learn that vast borax deposits like the one found in Death Valley are actually quite rare, and that's because it takes very special conditions to form. First, you need a source for the borax, and as we learn, that comes from the Funeral Mountains. Next, you need an extensive drainage system that does not discharge to the sea. Because of a fault at the base of the Black Mountains, Badwater Basin has been slowly sinking. As you probably know, water flows to the lowest point. This makes Badwater Basin the perfect collection basin for sediment, water, and of course minerals like borax. Because of the large concentration of borax, Death Valley became a significant mining site in the early 1880s when the Harmony Borax Works opened. Borax deposits were gathered from the desert floor and purified at the works, then shipped via 20 mule team wagons to the railhead at Mojave. If you're wondering how people lived and worked in the Death Valley heat, they didn't. The extreme desert heat prevented water in the crystallizing vats from cooling sufficiently, thus halting the borax crystallization process. Borax mining work brought rail through the remote Nevadan desert, allowing for the growth of towns such as Beatty and Death Valley Junction. It also put Death Valley on the map, drawing swaths of tourists. Mining has since stopped, but tourism certainly hasn't, drawing over 1 million geology lovers and non-geology lovers per year. And it's no wonder. It's a land of extremes, giving Death Valley a natural mystique. Despite deadly conditions, the park's ecosystem is surprisingly diverse and has somehow sustained the Timbisha Shoshone for centuries. As you have come to learn, Death Valley's landscape has been changing for millions of years. From a diverse shallow ocean to a gently sloping volcanic grassland, a mountainous lake-speckled landscape, to presently an unbearable desert filled with dune fields and salt flats. Death Valley is in a constant state of change. Erosion slowly carves away ancient rock formations, the basin continues to subside, and mountains climb even higher. It's curious to imagine what the future of Death Valley holds and if the hardy pupfish will continue to change with it. Thank you for joining me on this geology adventure, and I hope to see you next time. And there will be a next time. I've been a little inconsistent with posting the past few months because there have been big changes in my life, some good and some admittedly frustrating and heartbreaking. But I think I'm finally coming to a time of stability, hopefully. If not, I'll see you when I see ya.